You live with a voice you cannot silence, though it does not belong to you. It is not in the room, yet it dictates the rhythm of your thoughts. It lingers like a perfume that clings to your skin, the scent of origins you did not choose, but which has woven itself into the architecture of your being. You tell yourself you are free. You work, you speak, you pursue desire as if it belongs to you. Yet beneath each word, each choice, lies an echo of her gaze, a gaze that once defined the conditions of your survival. Every gesture toward independence trembles under the weight of an unconscious loyalty, an invisible umbilical cord that binds you not to flesh, but to the memory of flesh. The shadow of the mother is not merely her presence, it is the silence where her absence should have been. It is the withheld affection that becomes a hunger without end. It is the excessive tenderness that suffocates, wrapping around the child until his breath becomes borrowed, until his will is bent into a reflection of hers. The boy grows, but the man remains tethered. His loves are rehearsals of her approval, his rebellions mere pantomimes staged under her watchful eye. Desire becomes contaminated. The woman he longs for is both her and not her, both escape and return. Each kiss carries the weight of incestuous fantasy buried beneath shame. Each rejection burns with the old wound of abandonment. He does not see this consciously. No, he only knows that he cannot love without pain, cannot desire without guilt, cannot separate pleasure from punishment. His unconscious has already woven the pattern, and his conscious life merely repeats it. You may think this is pathology, but it is more ancient than illness. It is the structure of dependency that forged the ego itself. To love the mother, to hate the mother, to need her, and to despise her, this is the first prison of the psyche. To carry her shadow is to walk forever with the burden of that first ambivalence, unresolved, disguised in every later attachment. The man believes he chose his partner, he believes he chose his life, yet the deeper truth is that he's been compelled by repetition, by the compulsion to recreate what once wounded him, to stage again and again the impossible scene of reconciliation. He calls it destiny, he calls it failure. But beneath the words is the logic of the unconscious, indifferent to his conscious protests. What is repression if not this? The burial of unbearable conflict beneath the facade of normal life. He says he is strong, but his strength conceals weakness. He says he is free, but his freedom conceals servitude. He builds a life, but within that life, he hides the ruins of an unresolved childhood. And when the mask cracks through depression, through anxiety, through the paralysis of indecision, the shadow of the mother steps forward, reminding him that he never escaped, only disguised his chains. There is no easy consolation here. To see this truth is not to be healed. It is to awaken to the fact that the ego itself is built upon concealment, upon the avoidance of a pain too raw to face. He cannot kill the shadow, nor can he fully embrace it. He must learn instead to live with its weight, to recognize its presence in the texture of his thoughts, in the tremor of his desire. Every man is haunted, every man carries within him the ghost of his first dependency. Some deny it, some are destroyed by it. Some, in rare moments of courage, turn inward and confront the shadow, not to banish it, but to understand it. For only in understanding does one begin to loosen the grip of what was never chosen. The psychology of the man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not a tale of weakness. It is the universal condition of being born, of being shaped by forces one cannot resist. To confront it is to step into the deepest chamber of the unconscious, where freedom and captivity are indistinguishable and where truth lies waiting, uncomfortably silent, until one dares to look without flinching. You tell yourself that the past is behind you, but the past does not live behind it, lives beneath. It seeps upward, disguising itself in the cracks of your decisions, twisting your choices into repetitions of what you swore you would never repeat. You move forward in time, but your psyche circles, orbiting the unresolved. Every new beginning is shadowed by an old wound, and every declaration of independence trembles under the weight of unconscious return. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow carries a double burden, the longing for her approval and the rage at her power. Both forces, love and hatred, converge in silence. He may never speak of it, he may never even admit it to himself, but his body knows, his dreams know. The slip of the tongue, the anxious hesitation, the compulsive rituals of self-sabotage, they all whisper the truth the ego refuses to hear. The unconscious does not forget, it waits. The shadow is not the woman herself, but the psychic imprint she left. It is the way her voice became the scaffolding of his conscience, the way her absence became the template of his desire. He may believe he has buried her influence, but burial in the unconscious is not death. It is preservation. What is repressed returns, not as memory, but as symptom. What is denied reappears, not as truth, but as distortion. He suffers, and he does not know why. He resists, and he cannot name what he resists. There is a cruelty to the human psyche, a law that compels repetition. The man finds himself again and again in the arms of women who echo her touch, her rejection, her ambivalence. He mistakes this for fate. He thinks he is cursed, but it is not fate. It is the unconscious insisting that the conflict unresolved in childhood will be staged again until recognized. The psyche is merciless in its fidelity to the past. What is unacknowledged demands recognition even at the cost of suffering, especially at the cost of suffering. And here lies the paradox. To recognize the shadow is to risk collapse. To name the forbidden desire, to admit the buried rage, is to face the possibility that the self you thought you were is only a mask. This is why repression is chosen, why denial is seductive. The truth threatens to shatter the fragile illusion of autonomy. The ego prefers captivity and ignorance over the terror of seeing itself exposed. But captivity carries its own punishment. Anxiety, depression, paralysis, the slow erosion of vitality under the pressure of what is not faced. The man tries to silence the shadow with achievement. He tries to drown it with pleasure, to outrun it with ambition. But the shadow does not need to chase him. It lives within him. It speaks through the guilt that follows each success, through the emptiness that follows each pleasure. He cannot lie to his unconscious. He can only postpone its demand. There is no redemption in this recognition, only clarity. To see that his loves are not chosen freely but compelled. To see that his rebellions are not genuine breaks but rehearsals of a deeper dependency. To see that his hatred is inseparable from his longing. Such recognition does not heal, but it liberates him from the illusion that he is in control. It strips him bare before the truth. That freedom begins not in escape, but in acknowledgement of the chains he carries. The psychology of the man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not a pathology confined to him. It is the universal riddle of dependence and desire, of repression and return. The mother is the first universe, the first source of nourishment, and the first object of ambivalence. To grow is to separate, yet separation is never complete. Her shadow lingers, woven into the unconscious fabric of the self. No one escapes unmarked. Some build their lives upon the denial of it. Some crumble under the weight of it. A few dare to look into the abyss and admit what they find. The question is not whether the shadow exists. The question is whether you will continue to pretend it does not govern you. For every man lives under its influence, and the more he denies it, the more it determines the course of his life. To confront it is to see not only the mother, but the self she shaped, the ego that was constructed as defense, the desires that were forged in conflict. It is to walk into the silent chamber of the unconscious, where the truth waits without mercy, demanding not healing, but recognition. You feel the tension between what you want and what you are allowed to want. The unconscious has already inscribed its commandments into your being. You may not touch what you desire, and yet you cannot stop desiring it. This is the paradox of the forbidden. The more it is repressed, the more power it acquires, shaping your fantasies, your anxieties, your compulsions. You tell yourself you have moved on, but your mind betrays you in the privacy of dreams, in the sudden surge of guilt when pleasure approaches, in the collapse of satisfaction that follows the fulfillment of longing. What you bury does not vanish. It mutates. It disguises itself. It waits to ambush you where you least expect it. The mother's shadow becomes not only the ghost of love withheld or suffocatingly given, but also the architect of conscience. What you call morality is often nothing more than her voice disguised as your own. What you call guilt is the residue of her disapproval echoing through time. Even when she is gone, even when the earth has swallowed her body, she continues to live within you, not as a memory, but as a law. And this law cannot be broken without punishment, for the unconscious is both guardian and executioner. You think you are rebelling when you defy her, but rebellion still acknowledges her authority. The man who spends his life proving he is not under his mother's power remains chained to her presence. He measures his strength against her imagined gaze, his identity still defined by resistance to her judgment. Freedom is not achieved in denial, nor in opposition. Freedom begins only when the illusion of escape dissolves, when one admits that the shadow will never be banished, only integrated into the truth of who he island. But integration is not healing in the sentimental sense. It does not bring peace, it brings exposure. It strips away illusions of innocence. It confronts you with the unbearable fact that love and hatred, desire and disgust, gratitude and resentment are woven into the same bond. You want her tenderness, yet you resent the hold it has on you. You need her recognition, yet you despise yourself for needing it. This conflict does not resolve. It defines the structure of your psyche. To live is to endure it, to recognize it without flinching, to stop pretending you are pure when you are divided to the core. Every choice becomes a negotiation with this division. Every relationship becomes a battlefield where old conflicts return in new costumes. You are drawn to those who will wound you as she once did, because only in that wound do you recognize intimacy. You are repelled by those who offer unconditional love, because it feels alien, unfamiliar, unearned. You oscillate between craving closeness and fearing engulfment, between seeking escape and seeking return. This is the drama of ambivalence that lies beneath every romance, every friendship, every alliance you form. And beneath all of it, there is silence. The silence of what was never spoken, the silence of feelings that could not be named. This silence presses against the walls of your psyche, like water pressing against glass. You may not hear it in daylight, but in the solitude of night, when distractions fall away, the silence becomes deafening. It is then that you feel the old dependency stirring, the ancient hunger, the rage buried under obedience. The unconscious speaks not in words, but in pressure, in symptoms, in the restless movements of your soul. You can choose to ignore it. You can continue to build your life on the foundation of denial, layering achievement, and distraction over the unresolved. Many do, but repression has its cost. It extracts payment through anxiety that gnaws at you without cause, through self-sabotage that ruins what you thought you wanted, through the uncanny sense that no matter how far you go, you remain circling the same center. To repress is to postpone, never to erase. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow carries not only his personal burden, but the universal weight of humanity's first bond. For all men are sons before they are anything else, and all carry the ambivalence of that origin. Some are crushed by it, some live in denial of it. A few turn toward it with open eyes, not to conquer it, but to see it as it is. The original wound, the first love, the first prison, and the eternal companion of desire. The weight of the shadow grows heavier each time you pretend it is not there. You walk into new rooms, into new lives, carrying it behind you like a silent figure no one else can see. It sits at the table of your relationships. It whispers into the folds of your ambitions. It stands over you when you fail and mocks you when you succeed. For success without her blessing feels counterfeit, and failure without her gaze feels meaningless. The shadow demands its tribute, whether you offer it willingly or in denial. The unconscious binds desire to prohibition, and so every pleasure is tinged with guilt. You cannot surrender fully to intimacy without hearing the echo of her disapproval. You cannot enjoy the fruits of freedom without feeling the sting of betrayal. The more you strive to escape, the more deeply you inscribe the pattern. For the unconscious does not measure progress by distance, it measures only repetition. You are not escaping, you are rehearsing again and again the unresolved conflict that gave birth to you. At times you feel her presence as tenderness, at times as suffocation, at times as judgment so severe that it bleeds into every other gaze you meet. You search for her face in the eyes of lovers. You reenact her rejection in the cold withdrawal of others. You repeat her approval in the rare smile that validates your existence. Each encounter is an echo chamber. Every figure, a substitute. Every kiss, a displacement. Every argument, a rehearsal. The unconscious makes no distinction between past and present. It drags the past into the theater of the now, staging the same drama in infinite variations until recognition dawns. But recognition itself is unbearable. To admit that your deepest desires were first shaped in forbidden intimacy is to strip away the mask of innocence. To confess that your fiercest hatred's mask, dependency, is to confront your own fragility. The ego resists this truth because it destabilizes its entire edifice. The self you defend so passionately is not built on freedom, but on concealment. You are not who you think you are. You are who you needed to become to survive. The first gaze, the first rejection, the first embrace that threatened to consume you. And so you divide yourself. One part of you moves outward into the world, building, striving, pretending at autonomy. Another part remains frozen, still a child, still waiting for the door to open, still terrified of the consequences of wanting too much. This division is not pathology. It is the architecture of subjectivity itself. The neurotic suffers not because he is different, but because he feels too acutely what others successfully disguise. His symptoms betray what all carry in silence. The unresolved conflict between dependence and freedom, desire and guilt, memory and repression. What you repress leaks out in disguise. It surfaces in dreams that unsettle you with their strangeness, in slips of the tongue that reveal more than you intended, in sudden floods of emotion that feel alien to the moment. These are not accidents. They are eruptions of what the ego cannot contain. The unconscious has no patience for the polite lies of the self. It insists on expression, even if that expression comes in distorted forms. Every symptom is a message coded in pain. Every compulsion, a script written long before you had words. The mother's shadow is not simply a memory, it is the stage on which your life unfolds. She is the first other, and thus the measure of every other. She is the first source of nourishment, and thus the template for every hunger. She is the first love, and thus the unconscious mold of all future longing. To escape her shadow is not possible. To recognize it is the only dignity you are allowed. And recognition is not relief. It is a confrontation that strips away the illusions by which you lived. It tells you that freedom is limited, that your choices are not as free as you believed, that the ego you defend is a fragile defense mechanism against truths too heavy to hold. But in seeing this, you at least cease to be blind. You stop mistaking repetition for fate. You stop confusing symptom for essence. You learn to walk with the shadow, not as enemy, not as savior, but as the inevitable companion of your existence. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not a singular figure. He is the mirror of all men, the secret script behind civilization itself, the hidden law beneath art, politics, desire, and despair. For behind every pursuit of power, behind every work of beauty, behind every collapse into ruin, there lurks the same ambivalence, the longing to return to the origin and the terror of being consumed by it. This is not his story alone, it is the human story, written in silence, lived in repetition, buried in the unconscious that governs us all. You wake each morning believing you are beginning anew, yet every day is already scripted by the unresolved past. The gestures you repeat, the words you choose, the fears that rise before you even name them all are echoes of that first dependency, that first bond that never loosened its grip. The mother's shadow does not stand behind you like a memory. It stands within you as structure, as law, as the architecture of your desire and your guilt. To imagine you are free of it is the greatest illusion, and perhaps the most necessary one, for without that illusion, the weight of recognition would crush you. The unconscious plays its games in silence. You pursue goals with great determination, only to sabotage yourself when success approaches, because somewhere within, success feels like betrayal. You love passionately, yet retreat when intimacy deepens, because closeness awakens the terror of suffocation. You seek freedom, yet bind yourself to patterns of dependency that humiliate you, because repetition is safer than the unknown. These are not random contradictions. They are the silent negotiations of a psyche split between desire and prohibition, between longing and dread. In dreams, the shadow speaks most clearly. You see her face blurred into the faces of others. You encounter figures who lure you with tenderness, but punish you with cruelty. You relive abandonment disguised as fantasy, and you wake unsettled, unable to name what you felt. The dream is not nonsense. It is the truth smuggled past the censors of the ego, truth too dangerous to confront in waking life. The dream is the language of the unconscious, and in that language, the mother never disappears. She changes form, she shifts mask, but her presence saturates the stage. There is no cure for this. To cure would mean to erase, and what has shaped, you cannot be undone. The man who seeks liberation from his mother's shadow does not find healing, but clarity. He begins to see that his conflicts are not accidents, but necessities, that his guilt is not baseless, but the echo of ancient prohibition, that his longing is not shameful, but the residue of the first bond. Clarity is not comfort, but it is truth. And truth, though it wounds, cuts through the fog of self-deception. The ego resists this clarity because it threatens collapse. The ego thrives on the illusion of autonomy, on the belief that your choices are your own, that your life is self-directed. To admit the power of the unconscious, to admit the persistence of the mother's shadow, is to recognize that your autonomy is limited, that your freedom is structured by forces you did not choose. But the alternative is blindness. A blindness that breeds repetition, suffering, and the endless return of the same disguised conflicts. You may ask why the unconscious insists on this repetition. It is not cruelty for its own sake. It is compulsion in service of recognition. What was not resolved must be staged again, in the hope that this time it will be seen. The psyche does not seek pleasure alone. It seeks truth, even if truth arrives through pain. The repetition compulsion is the unconscious demanding acknowledgement, forcing you to confront what the ego has buried. Until you see it, you will suffer it. Once you see it, you will still suffer, but you will suffer consciously, and that difference is everything. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not weak. He is human. To carry the weight of unresolved ambivalence, to live with the tension between dependence and autonomy, to navigate desire marked by guilt and hatred is the human condition itself. Some disguise it better than others. Some break under the strain. A few choose to look directly into it, to accept that the self is not master in its own house, to endure the knowledge that every act of love, every act of rebellion, every act of creation is haunted by the original bond. And what then is left? Not purity, not liberation. What is left is the dignity of recognition, to stand in the presence of your own shadow and say, yes, this is mine. To admit that your life is not free from chains, but to walk with those chains knowingly, rather than pretending they do not exist. The shadow remains, but you no longer serve it blindly. You see it. You carry it. And in that act of carrying, you become something closer to whole, not healed, not cleansed, but unflinchingly awake. You may believe that time will dissolve the hold of the shadow, that distance from childhood will lessen its grip. But the unconscious does not obey the laws of chronology. It is timeless. What was repressed at the origin remains alive as if it happened yesterday, untouched by the calendar. The adult body ages, the voice deepens, the hair grays, but beneath the surface the child persists, still waiting, still longing, still enraged, still terrified. You do not outgrow the shadow. You grow around it, constructing layers of identity that disguise its permanence. Yet when crisis comes, when loss pierces your defenses, When desire overwhelms restraint, the child's voice breaks through, and you realize you have never left that first chamber of dependency. The shadow is not passive. It governs through guilt, through the invisible strings that pull you back when you attempt to move too far. You may succeed in career, but guilt gnaws at you for surpassing what you believe she would allow. You may choose a partner, but you measure them unconsciously against her presence, condemning them for failing to be her and resenting them when they come too close to resembling her. You may proclaim independence, but in the silence of night, you still feel the need for her recognition, a need that humiliates you precisely because it has never faded. The shadow enforces loyalty not through reason, but through psychic law, a law inscribed in your being before you had words. This law is double-edged. On one side, it forbids the fulfillment of desire, branding it as shameful. On the other, it compels the return to desire, ensuring its persistence. The result is an endless cycle of pursuit and retreat, hunger and denial, satisfaction laced with punishment. This is why pleasure so often collapses into despair, why joy carries within it the seed of self-reproach, why the sweetness of intimacy curdles into suspicion. The shadow ensures that no experience is pure. It contaminates each moment with the residue of ambivalence, so that you can neither surrender fully nor escape completely. What is neurosis if not the visible surface of this hidden battle? The obsessive thought, the compulsive ritual, the paralyzing hesitation, these are not meaningless disturbances. They are the language of the unconscious, the body's attempt to negotiate between longing and prohibition. The symptom is both suffering and survival, both prison and signal. It reveals the place where the ego has refused to look, where the shadow exerts its silent dominion. To analyze the symptom is not to cure it, but to decode it, to see in its strangeness the truth of what has been concealed. Yet recognition carries its own terror. To admit that your desires were forged in the crucible of forbidden intimacy is to face the collapse of the innocent self-image you defend so desperately. To accept that your failures are not accidents, but repetitions, is to strip away the comfort of blaming circumstance. To confront that your very identity is built upon repression is to question what it means to call anything truly yours. This is why so many resist analysis, why so many prefer the pain of ignorance to the anguish of seeing. The unconscious demands honesty, and honesty is unbearable when it exposes the foundations of who you are. Still, there is a certain dignity in such confrontation. To face the shadow is not to destroy it, but to live without illusion. It is to stop confusing symptoms with fate, to stop mistaking repetition for destiny. It is to acknowledge that your freedom is narrow, bounded by forces older than your conscious will, but to act within that narrow space with awareness rather than blindness. It is a freedom without triumph, a freedom marked by humility, but it is freedom nonetheless. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is every man who dares to look into himself without the armor of denial. He is not exceptional in his suffering, he is simply unmasked. His story is the story of human subjectivity itself, born in dependence, forged in ambivalence, sustained by repression, and haunted by repetition. The shadow remains always. But when it is seen, when its presence is no longer hidden, it ceases to govern in silence. It becomes part of the truth you carry, heavy but clear, unbearable yet undeniable. And in that clarity, life, though still divided, becomes less of a deception and more of a reckoning. You move through the world believing you are acting from choice, but each decision carries the invisible fingerprint of that first relation. The partners you are drawn to, the enemies you create, the ideals you worship, the failures you repeat, all bear the trace of the original ambivalence. The mother's shadow is not a ghost that follows you, it is the mold into which your psyche was poured. You cannot escape it because you are composed of it, and yet your entire life becomes an effort to deny this truth, to pretend that what binds you does not exist. When guilt floods you for no apparent reason, when shame rises even in the presence of affection, when anger erupts against those who only offered you care, you are not responding to the present moment, you are responding to the unresolved past. The unconscious collapses time, dragging ancient conflicts into the immediacy of today. You lash out, you retreat, you sabotage yourself, not because the situation demands it, but because the shadow insists that old wounds be reopened. In this way, life becomes less of a progression and more of a repetition, the same stage set rebuilt with different actors, the same lines spoken with new voices. The shadow does not only haunt love, it infiltrates ambition. Every pursuit of achievement carries within it the need for recognition, and every recognition echoes her gaze, whether approving or withholding. The triumph you savor quickly turns hollow, for without her presence, the victory feels incomplete. The failure you dread cuts deeper than disappointment, for it awakens the primal fear of being cast out, of being unworthy of love. Success and failure alike are measured against a scale that no longer exists in reality, but which remains absolute in the unconscious. You do not work for yourself, you work for a ghost, and the ghost is never satisfied. In the silence of solitude, when the distractions fade, the shadow reveals its truest form. It is not the mother as she was, but the mother as you internalized her, both nurturing and devouring, both necessary and threatening, both the origin of life and the figure of death. This duality is unbearable, and so the psyche splits it, represses it, disguises it. But repression cannot erase, it only forces the truth to return in disguise, in symptoms that unsettle, in dreams that disturb, in desires that shame you with their intensity. You are never free of what you repress. You are ruled by it all the more. And what of resistance? Resistance is the ego's last defense, the refusal to look at what it already knows. It is the silence that falls when painful truths approach, the sudden fatigue in the midst of self-examination, the rationalizations that distract from the wound. Resistance protects you from collapse, but it also traps you in blindness. For as long as you resist, you remain the prisoner of repetition, doomed to relive what you cannot bear to recognize. Resistance is not strength, it is captivity disguised as control. There is no redemption offered here, only recognition. To see the shadow is not to dissolve it, but to cease pretending it does not govern you. To acknowledge its presence is to strip away the illusion of innocence, to accept that desire and guilt, love and hatred, gratitude and resentment are bound together in the same knot. You cannot untie it. You can only learn to hold it without fleeing. This is the dignity of psychoanalysis, not healing in the shallow sense, but awakening to the truth you already carry, the truth you tried to bury beneath layers of denial. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is the figure in whom the universal condition is revealed. He is not alone in his suffering, though he feels alone. He is not uniquely cursed, though he believes himself marked. He is simply exposed to what all men conceal, that the mother never vanishes, that her presence shapes every bond, every desire, every act of rebellion, every cry for freedom. The shadow does not disappear. It becomes the companion of your existence, the silent witness to all that you are. To walk with it knowingly is not peace, but it is honesty. And perhaps that is the only freedom the unconscious allows. You imagine that love will free you, that another's arms will loosen the grip of the shadow, but love only reawakens what was buried. You are drawn to the familiar contours of tenderness mixed with danger, affection mingled with judgment. You seek the face that mirrors what you first knew, and when you find it, you call it destiny. But it is not destiny, it is repetition. The unconscious does not create new stories, it restages the first one, demanding a resolution that never comes. You fall in love, and within that love, you fall back into the old prison, desiring what you both crave and fear, despising the need that exposes your dependency. Even in hatred, the shadow persists. To despise her is still to revolve around her. To reject her is still to acknowledge her power. You build your life as a monument of opposition, but monuments are still devoted to what they resist. You curse her name, but in the curse, you bind yourself to her presence. The unconscious recognizes no difference between love and hate, only intensity, only attachment. What you hate clings as tightly as what you adore. What you resist defines you as much as what you embrace. The shadow thrives in this ambivalence, feeding on both devotion and rebellion, for both are forms of servitude. There is no silence in the unconscious. Even when you suppress every thought, even when you train yourself to ignore the pull, It speaks in another register. It speaks in the tension of your muscles, in the headaches that rise without cause, in the insomnia that gnaws at your nights. It speaks in the sudden collapse of motivation, in the inexplicable heaviness that steals your breath. The body becomes the stage on which the repressed performs its drama, translating the unspoken into suffering. Illness is not always the language of biology. Often it is the protest of what has been silenced too long. And when you dream, the mask slips further. You encounter her not as she was, but as the psyche has preserved her, shifting, terrifying, tender, omnipotent. You wake, unsettled, unable to name the strangeness, but the dream does not lie. It reveals the forbidden desire, the unresolved rage, the insatiable hunger for recognition. The dream is not fantasy in the trivial sense. It is the truth expressed in symbols, the return of what repression sought to bury. And though you may dismiss it upon waking, it shapes the undercurrent of your day, guiding choices you mistake for your own. The greatest cruelty is that the unconscious has no morality. It does not distinguish between sacred and profane, acceptable and shameful. It insists only on expression. The ego recoils, horrified by what it discovers in its depths, but the unconscious remains indifferent. It is both primitive and precise, both merciless and honest. You may deny it, but denial only strengthens its hold. You may moralize against it, but morality has no authority in its domain. The unconscious is older than morality, older than culture, older than you. It does not obey. It compels. And so you live with the shadow as both burden and truth. You try to flee, but flight circles back. You try to ignore, but silence amplifies its presence. You try to conquer, but conquest is only another form of acknowledgement. The shadow is not an intruder, it is part of you, the part you refuse to see. To reject it is to reject yourself. To accept it is to shatter the illusion of innocence. Neither path is easy, but only one leads to clarity. For in clarity, you stop mistaking your repetitions for fate, your symptoms for destiny, your suffering for mystery. You begin to see the architecture of your life for what it is, a structure built around an absence, a self forged in repression, a freedom bound by chains it cannot cut. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not simply trapped, he is revealed. He carries openly what others bury. He becomes the emblem of the conflict every human carries in silence, to need and to resent, to desire and to fear, to cling and to reject. His suffering is the mirror of ours, magnified, unmasked, undeniable. To listen to his story is to hear your own, whether you admit it or not. The shadow belongs not only to him, but to all of us. For we are all children before we are anything else, and no one leaves the first bond unscarred. Every attempt at forgetting becomes another act of remembrance. You think you bury her by refusing to speak of her, yet the silence itself is her monument. You imagine distance will dissolve her presence, but the farther you walk, the longer her shadow stretches. You declare yourself free, and in the very declaration she returns. For who else but her is the silent witness against whom you measure freedom? In trying to sever the bond, you tighten it. In trying to erase her, you inscribe her deeper into the unconscious script of your being. The psyche does not forgive. It does not release. It preserves. The infantile wishes that were never fulfilled, the rage that was never voiced, the dependency that was never resolved, they remain sealed within the unconscious as if time itself refused to move forward. You call yourself an adult, yet within you still lives the child who trembles under her disapproval, who longs for her embrace, who rages at her power. This child does not vanish. He surfaces in the cracks of your composure, in the helplessness that shatters your pride, in the outbursts that embarrass you. You are not one self, but many, layered, contradictory, bound together by the repression that pretends they are one. Your guilt is older than your choices. It is not about what you have done, but about what you wish to do, what you still wish to do, though you bury it under morality. You feel guilty not only for your failures, but for your desires, not only for your actions, but for your thoughts. This is the cruelty of the unconscious. It punishes not for deeds, but for wishes, not for transgressions committed, but for fantasies entertained. And so guilt saturates your life, attaching itself to whatever object is near at hand, disguising its true origin while ensuring that no pleasure remains untainted. The shadow turns even your virtues into disguises. Your ambition may be nothing more than the child's plea for recognition. Your morality may be her voice echoing through your conscience. Your rebellion may be another form of dependence, a life defined not by freedom but by opposition. Even what you call love may be contaminated, for beneath affection often lies the longing to heal the original wound, to be seen, to be chosen, to be enough at last. And because no partner can resolve what belongs to the unconscious, every love is doomed to carry disappointment, every intimacy shadowed by the impossible demand for redemption. Resistance rises when the truth comes too close. You grow tired when confronted with yourself. You dismiss insights as irrelevant. You distract yourself with trivialities. These are not failures of attention, they are defenses. Resistance is the ego's last line of defense against collapse, against the unbearable recognition that the life you call yours is governed by forces beyond your control. Yet every defense costs you. It protects you from truth, but it also imprisons you in blindness. What you refuse to see, you are condemned to repeat, and repetition is merciless. You find yourself again in the same arguments, the same betrayals, the same despair, different faces, different names, but the same structure. Each time you believe this time will be different, and each time you awaken to the same cycle. The unconscious is relentless in its demand. It will not rest until you recognize what you are trying to flee. It would rather destroy you with suffering than allow the truth to remain buried. For truth in the unconscious is not a matter of choice, it is law. You may dream of liberation, of a life unburdened by her presence, but liberation is an illusion. What is possible is not escape, but confrontation. Not healing, but recognition. To stand before the shadow and admit its permanence. To see that your freedom is bounded, your autonomy compromised, your identity forged from repression. This is not despair, it is honesty. It is the stripping away of illusions that cost more to maintain than they give in return. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow lives the truth we all conceal. He is not broken beyond repair. He is simply unable to disguise what governs us all. His burden is ours, his suffering universal. He shows us the price of being born, of needing before we could choose, of desiring before we could understand. The shadow is not his curse alone, it is humanity's inheritance. To acknowledge it is not to be free, but to live without deception, to bear with open eyes what the unconscious never forgets. You convince yourself that you have mastered the past, that maturity has delivered you from its grip, but the unconscious never signs the contract of adulthood. It does not recognize progress, only persistence. The child you once were remains sealed inside you, his longings undiminished, his fears intact, his rage compressed like coal under pressure. You walk into boardrooms, into bedrooms, into battles with yourself, and it is that child who speaks through you, cloaked in the language of the present but still bound to the mother's gaze. You are not simply haunted, you are inhabited. Every triumph feels incomplete because it is not hers to witness. Every failure cuts deeper because it echoes her imagined disapproval. The others around you, partners, friends, rivals, become carriers of her judgment, stand-ins for her affection, substitutes for her absence. You do not love them for themselves, you love them because they resemble her, or because they do not. You do not hate them for their deeds. You hate them because they awaken in you the unresolved ambivalence that once defined your survival. Each relationship is a repetition, a variation of the first drama played endlessly on the stage of your unconscious. Desire itself becomes corrupted, for it cannot separate longing from guilt. What you want most carries within it the sting of prohibition. You touch, but your touch trembles. You love, but your love recoils from its own intensity. You surrender, But in surrender, you feel the chains tighten. This is the paradox of the shadow. It contaminates every pleasure with anxiety, every intimacy with fear, every freedom with punishment. You are never fully present in joy, for guilt sits beside you, whispering its silent accusations. And what of the ego, the proud mask of the self? It is built precisely to conceal this truth. It insists on coherence where there is only contradiction, insists on freedom where there is only repetition, insists on innocence where there is only ambivalence. The ego survives by pretending, by weaving together a narrative that spares you from collapse. But symptoms betray the lie. Dreams puncture it. Slips of the tongue mock it. In the end, the unconscious always wins, for it does not need your consent to govern you. The suffering you endure is not random. It is the cost of concealment. Anxiety is the signal of repression. Depression, the weight of silenced rage. Obsession, the disguise of forbidden desire. These are not illnesses in the medical sense. They are messages, encrypted communications from the unconscious demanding to be heard. To treat them as mere malfunctions is to miss their meaning. They are the voice of the shadow, the testimony of what was never allowed to speak, but to listen is dangerous. For listening means admitting that you are not master in your own house. It means facing the truth that your choices are not as free as you imagine, that your desires are not clean, that your conscience is not purely yours. It means surrendering the comfort of innocence and accepting the burden of knowledge. This is why so few dare to look inward, why resistance rises like a wall the moment analysis begins. The psyche defends itself not only against pain, but against truth itself. And yet, to turn away is to remain trapped. For what is denied returns in disguise, and what is repressed repeats in suffering. To refuse recognition is to live in blindness, circling endlessly the same patterns, mistaking them for fate. Only in confrontation does the cycle shift, not toward healing, not toward release, but toward awareness. To know the shadow does not dissolve it, but it changes your relation to it. You stop serving it blindly. You stop mistaking its law for destiny. You begin to see your life not as a mystery, but as a structure, not as chaos, but as repetition, not as freedom, but as a negotiation with forces that precede you. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not a tragic exception. He is the mirror of us all. His failure to sever is our common inheritance. His ambivalence is our hidden truth. He is simply less successful at concealing it, less capable of disguising the weight beneath his steps. His suffering reveals the condition we all share, that the first bond is never erased, that love and hatred remain entangled, that the shadow of the mother lingers as long as the unconscious rules, and the unconscious rules until the very end. And so you arrive at the place where every mask falls, where the defenses you built no longer hold, where silence speaks louder than words. The shadow is still here, unchanged, unrelenting. You cannot kill it, you cannot flee it, you cannot bargain with it. It is woven into you as inseparable as bone from marrow. To live is not to escape it, but to bear it. To recognize it without disguise, to acknowledge the truth the ego was built to conceal. This recognition is not triumph. It is not the soft promise of healing. It is the cold clarity that you were never free, that your choices were never untouched, that your very self was shaped in the crucible of ambivalence you could not resolve. Yet in that clarity lies a strange dignity, the dignity of seeing without illusion, of ceasing to run from what has always governed you. The mother's shadow remains, but it no longer deceives you. You are divided, and you will remain divided. You are bound, and you will remain bound. But you are also awake. And to be awake, even to unbearable truth, is to live with open eyes, to endure without denial, to carry the shadow not as an enemy, not as a savior, but as the inescapable companion of your existence. The man who cannot escape his mother's shadow is not alone, for none of us escape. We only choose whether to conceal or to confront. And when you confront, when you stand before the weight of what was never resolved, you touch the deepest reality of what it means to be human, to love and to hate in the same breath, to long and to resist in the same heartbeat, to walk through life not healed, but unflinchingly conscious. This is the ending that does not end, the truth that does not comfort, the shadow that does not fade. It remains as you remain until the very last breath.